Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Samuel was proud of what he'd built. At 35, his judo school was the go-to place in the region, with athletes winning medals at state and even national competitions. The dojo was more than a business, it was his purpose, the place where he shaped not just fighters, but people of character. Every mat, every belt hanging on the wall, every trophy in the display case represented years of dedication, sweat, and unwavering principles. Respect, discipline, humility, these were the pillars Samuel taught every day, and he lived every word he spoke. Olivia, his 33-year-old wife, had never shared that passion. She worked as a manager at a clothing boutique downtown and kept to her own routine, her own interests. In their 7 years of marriage, she'd shown up at a few major competitions, smiled for photos, and politely clapped when Samuel's students won. But the spark in her eyes never matched the fire he felt. Samuel accepted that. Couples don't need to share every passion, he thought. What mattered was mutual respect, partnership, and building a life together. Their routine was predictable and, in Samuel's view, comfortable. He'd wake up early, train, spend the entire day at the dojo between classes and administrative work, and get home around 9 at night. Olivia had more flexible hours but often worked late too, handling inventory or dealing with suppliers. They met for quick dinners, shared the couch watching something on TV, and slept side by side. There were no big arguments, no overwhelming passion, but there was stability, or at least that's what Samuel believed. Alexander was a constant thorn in Samuel's side. The 28-year-old had arrived at the dojo 2 years earlier with impressive credentials, a brown belt earned at another school, experience in collegiate competitions, refined technique. But from the very first practice, Samuel saw the problem: Alexander had talent, but no character. He'd show up late without apologizing, openly questioned instructions as if he knew more than the sensei, treated beginner students with disdain, and carried an arrogance that made Samuel grind his teeth. Over the next 2 years, Samuel tried everything. Private talks about judo values. Temporary suspensions. He even offered one-on-one mentoring, trying to understand where that destructive attitude came from. Alexander would always listen with a half-smile, give superficial agreement, and go right back to the same behavior. The final straw had come 3 months earlier, when Alexander deliberately shoved a 15-year-old student during practice in a way that clearly wasn't technique, it was pure aggression. Samuel reprimanded him harshly in front of everyone. Alexander had laughed, a low, bitter laugh, before stepping off the mat. Because of all this, Alexander was never selected for competitions. No matter how technically skilled he was, Samuel wouldn't allow someone lacking discipline, respect, and humility to represent his school. Judo was more than throws and takedowns, it was a life philosophy. And Alexander embodied everything Samuel stood against. That Friday in March began like any other. Samuel woke up at 5:30 a.m., trained alone for an hour, made breakfast while Olivia still slept. By 9, he was at the dojo, reviewing the list of athletes heading to the regional competition. There were 15 young people between 16 and 23, all excited, all prepared. The tournament was in a city about an hour away, and the team would stay at a hotel all weekend, departure scheduled for 5 p.m. Friday, returning Sunday after the finals. Olivia seemed unusually cheerful that morning. Samuel had come home quickly at lunchtime to pick up some documents, and she was tidying up the house, humming a song he didn't recognize. "It's all going to go great at the tournament," she said, giving him a quick kiss as he left again. "Enjoy the weekend with your athletes. I'll use these days to get the house in order and finally watch that series you hate." She smiled, and Samuel smiled back, noticing nothing but a wife enjoying the prospect of a quiet weekend. At exactly 5 p.m., the dojo van was parked out front, Ben, Samuel's 26-year-old assistant, behind the wheel. The 15 athletes filed in, chatting loudly and laughing, their energy contagious. Samuel locked up the dojo and walked to his car, a well-kept black sedan parked right behind. The plan was simple: Ben would drive the van with the athletes, and Samuel would follow in his own car. That way, he'd have mobility in case something last-minute came up, plus he could head back early Sunday if needed to open the school Monday morning. The road was quiet. Samuel drove calmly, keeping the van in sight a few cars ahead. The radio played softly, something instrumental that didn't demand attention. His mind ran through strategies for his athletes, combinations of moves that might surprise specific opponents, posture adjustments he'd noticed in recent practices. He was focused, confident. His team was ready. About 20 minutes in, halfway to the destination, Samuel decided to mentally review the equipment checklist. Judogi, check, every athlete had brought 2 sets. First aid, check, full kit in the van. Documentation, check, all registrations and ID cards organized. Belts, the rank belts that identified his athletes in matches. Samuel felt a twinge of unease. He'd set them all aside the night before, placed them in a specific bag. But was that bag in the van or in his own travel bag? At the next traffic light, Samuel grabbed his phone and called Ben. "Are the belts with you in the van?" he asked straight out. He heard shuffling sounds, Ben probably asking someone to check the gear bags. After a minute that felt like forever, Ben came back on the line. "They're not here, Sensei. Must be with you." Samuel hung up and immediately pulled over to the shoulder. He opened the trunk, rummaged through his own travel bag. Nothing. The belts were still at home, probably in the office cabinet where he'd left them. Without the correct rank belts, the referees wouldn't allow his athletes to compete. It was an absolute rule in official competitions. There was no alternative. Samuel grabbed his phone again and called Ben. "Keep going. I'll go back for the belts and meet you at the hotel in 2 hours, max." Ben agreed. He was used to trusting the sensei's decisions. Samuel made a U-turn at the next exit and sped back home. The frustration with himself was huge. In over 10 years of training athletes for competitions, he'd never forgotten something so essential. But there was no time to dwell on it now. He needed to fix the problem fast and get back to his team. Traffic was lighter heading the opposite way. Samuel drove with his jaw clenched, passing cars whenever it was safe. 40 minutes later, he pulled into his neighborhood. The street was quiet, the typical calm of a Friday night when most people were still at work or getting ready to go out. Samuel parked in front of the house. It was 7:25 p.m. The living room lights were on. Samuel briefly found that odd. Olivia usually left the whole house lit when she was alone, saying it made her feel safer. But the thought lasted only a second. He was focused on grabbing the belts and getting back on the road as fast as possible. Using his key, he quietly opened the front door, a habit from years of coming home late and not wanting to startle Olivia if she was already asleep. Music was playing, something low, sensual, definitely not Olivia's usual style. Samuel walked down the short hallway toward the living room, already taking off his jacket, thinking of grabbing the belts, leaving a quick note for Olivia, and heading out. Then he reached the living room entrance, and the world stopped. Olivia was on the couch, the brown leather one they'd picked out together 3 years ago, haggled over the price, and assembled themselves when it arrived. She was nearly undressed, clothes scattered across the wooden floor, tangled in Alexander's arms. The athlete was shirtless, pants unbuttoned. For one absurd fraction of a second, Samuel's brain tried to interpret the scene as something else, maybe a medical emergency, maybe he was misunderstanding, maybe it was a nightmare. But it wasn't. Alexander's eyes met Samuel's first. And in that look, Samuel saw something that made his blood boil. It wasn't shame, guilt, or even fear. It was satisfaction. A silent triumph, almost a smile, as if Alexander were saying, "Yeah, I did this, and what are you going to do about it?" Then, with the explosive reflexes of a trained athlete, Alexander disentangled himself from Olivia, leapt over the back of the couch, crossed the 3 meters to the side window overlooking the garden, which was open, and jumped out. Samuel heard his feet hit the grass, then quick footsteps fading down the sidewalk, disappearing into the night. Samuel didn't chase him. Every muscle in his body wanted to run after him, knock him to the ground, make him pay physically for the betrayal, the humiliation. But years of martial discipline, of daily practiced self-control, kept his feet rooted. Violence wasn't the answer. Violence would lower him to Alexander's level. Instead, his eyes turned to Olivia. She'd pulled the decorative throw blanket from the couch to cover herself, her face a mix of absolute shock and panic. Her eyes were wide, her mouth open, trying to form words that wouldn't come. "Samuel," she finally managed, her voice trembling. "You weren't supposed to. I thought you'd be gone. This isn't. I can explain." "Explain," Samuel repeated, and his own voice sounded strange to him, distant, as if coming from far away. "You're going to explain how you ended up on our couch, in our house, with Alexander." He said the athlete's name with palpable disgust. "The same Alexander I've tried to teach respect, discipline, character to. The one student I consider a complete moral failure." Olivia tried to stand, still clutching the blanket. "It was a mistake, Samuel, I swear, it was just once. He showed up here and..." But Samuel raised his hand, cutting her off. "Not now." His voice was dangerously calm. "I didn't come here for this. I came for the belts because I have a team waiting for me. Athletes who respect the values I teach. People of character." He walked to the adjoining office, each step measured, controlled. He found the belt bag exactly where he'd left it, hanging from the inside doorknob of the cabinet. When he returned to the living room, Olivia was standing, wrapped in the blanket, tears starting to stream down her face. "Samuel, please, we need to talk." He walked past her as if she weren't there. "When I get back Sunday," he said, pausing for just a second at the door without looking back, "you won't be here. Or I won't be. You decide." And he left, closing the door with a soft click that somehow sounded more final than a loud slam. The drive back to the tournament was a blur. Samuel drove on autopilot, his mind flooded with images he couldn't erase: Alexander's hands on Olivia's body, that smug look in his eyes, the ease with which Olivia had betrayed 7 years of marriage in their own home, on the couch where they'd watched movies together, talked about the future, made plans. And Alexander, of all the men in the world, she'd chosen the one who represented everything Samuel despised. It wasn't an accident, Samuel realized as the dark road stretched ahead. Olivia knew his students, knew his opinions about each of them. She knew exactly what Alexander meant to Samuel: a constant problem, a character flaw, someone he'd tried to shape and failed. The choice was deliberate. It was a message, conscious or not. It was her way of saying that everything Samuel valued, preached, lived, respect, discipline, integrity, meant nothing. Samuel arrived at the tournament hotel around 10 p.m. Ben was waiting in the lobby, worry written all over his face. "Sensei, is everything okay?" "You look," Samuel cut him off with a wave. "It's handled. I've got the belts. Let's focus on the tournament." Ben had known Samuel for 6 years, he'd been a student before becoming an assistant. He knew when not to push. The weekend was a silent torment. Samuel functioned on autopilot, coaching his athletes, shouting instructions from ringside, analyzing opponents, adjusting strategies. His team won 2 gold medals and 3 silver, excellent results. The athletes celebrated, took photos, thanked Samuel for his preparation. He smiled in the right places, said the right things, but it felt like he was watching everything from outside his own body. At night, alone in his hotel room, Samuel let his mind work. The initial rage was giving way to something colder, more calculated. He wasn't a man of impulse. Every move needed to be thoughtful, strategic. And the first thing he needed was professional legal guidance. Sunday morning, while the team packed to head back, Samuel used his phone to search for family law attorneys. He found Patricia Morales, a lawyer with excellent reviews and a reputation for being relentless but ethical. He called and left a message scheduling a consultation for first thing Monday. The drive back was long. Samuel followed the van in silence, radio off, just the sound of the engine and his own thoughts. He knew he'd return to an empty house. Olivia wouldn't be foolish enough to stay after his ultimatum. Or maybe she would. Maybe she'd be there, ready to beg, explain, promise change. Samuel didn't know which he preferred. When he finally got home Sunday night after 8, it was exactly what he'd both expected and feared. The house was dark and silent. He walked in through the front door and turned on the lights. The living room was clean, tidy. That damn couch was spotless, as if nothing had happened there 2 days earlier. Samuel walked to the bedroom. Olivia's dresser drawers were empty. The bathroom held none of her products. Her toothbrush was gone. She'd taken her things and left, probably for her parents' house. On the kitchen table was a note. Olivia's handwriting, shaky. Samuel, I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you. Please, can we talk when you're ready? I love you. Samuel read the note once, folded it carefully, and put it in a drawer. There was no love there. If there had been, none of this would have happened. Monday morning, before opening the dojo, Samuel sat in Patricia Morales's office. The office was discreet but professional, decorated with diplomas and certificates on the walls. Patricia was about 40, her black hair pulled into a flawless bun, her gaze direct and no nonsense. Tell me everything, she said, a recorder on the table. Samuel told her, starting from the beginning of the marriage, through Alexander, all the way to walking in on them. He kept his voice steady, factual, without spilling unnecessary emotion. When he finished, Patricia asked specific questions about assets, bank accounts, documentation. Then she leaned back in her chair. The state we live in considers adultery an asset division when there's provable evidence, she said. Do you have witnesses? Samuel shook his head. Just me. Patricia thought for a moment. What about Alexander? He could serve as a witness, even if unwilling. Samuel felt a plan forming. He's my student. Or was. I'm expelling him from the school today. Patricia nodded. Do it officially, in writing, citing a violation of your code of ethics. That document could be useful. And Samuel, she leaned forward, stay calm. I know it's hard, but any impulsive action on your part could be used against you. Let the law do its work. Samuel returned to the dojo with renewed purpose. He checked the student schedule. Alexander had class that afternoon at 6. Perfect. Samuel would spend the day preparing the necessary paperwork. At 5:30, he asked Ben to gather all students on the main mat. Nearly 40 people were there at that hour, kids, teens, and adults. The perfect audience. Alexander arrived at 6:10, late as always. He walked into the dojo with his usual arrogant posture, already in his GI belt haphazardly tied. When he saw everyone assembled, he frowned. What's going on? He asked, looking around. Then his eyes met Samuel's, and for a split second, something like fear crossed his face. Samuel stood at the center of the mat, arms crossed. His voice was clear, projected so everyone could hear. Alexander, please come up front. Alexander hesitated, then slowly walked until he stood 3 meters from Samuel. Alexander, Samuel began, each word deliberate, 2 days ago, I walked into my house and found you with my wife in a situation you know exactly what it was. A murmur ran through the assembled students. Alexander turned pale, eyes widening. Sensei, Samuel raised his hand. I'm not asking for explanations. I'm here to make an official announcement. He pulled an envelope from his pocket. You are expelled from this school, effective immediately, for serious violation of our ethics and conduct code. Betrayal of trust, disrespect toward your sensei, and behavior incompatible with judo values. He handed the envelope to Alexander, who took it with trembling hands. Your name will be removed from all records. You're no longer welcome here. And I guarantee, Samuel leaned slightly forward, lowering his voice so only Alexander could clearly hear, I'll make sure every judo school within 100 miles knows exactly what kind of person you are. Alexander tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing. Then realizing every eye was on him, filled with judgment and disgust, he simply turned and almost ran out of the dojo. The door slammed behind him, echoing in the silence. Samuel turned to the remaining students. This is a lesson for all of you, he said calmly. Technical skill without character is worthless. Judo teaches us to be better people, not just better fighters. Anyone who doesn't understand that has no place here. And with that, he returned to regular training, as if nothing had happened. In the weeks that followed, the divorce moved quickly. Olivia tried contacting him repeatedly, calls, texts, even showed up once at the dojo door. Samuel refused to speak to her directly, routing all communication through Patricia. The attorney was relentless, using the eyewitness account and Alexander's documented expulsion as evidence of adultery. Olivia had no real defense. The twist Samuel didn't expect came 4 weeks after the discovery. Patricia called with a tone he hadn't heard before, a mix of satisfaction and surprise. Samuel, you need to come to the office. Now. When Samuel arrived, Patricia held a document in her hand. Olivia's lawyer reached out. She wants to settle. Samuel frowned. What kind of settlement? Patricia slid the paper across the desk. She's giving up any claim to the dojo, the house, the joint savings. She only wants her personal belongings and will sign a non-disparagement clause. Samuel read the document twice. Why? That's practically everything. Patricia leaned back in her chair, a half-smile on her face. Because she found something out. Alexander vanished, Samuel. He blocked her everywhere, changed his number, left town. And more, he's under investigation for possible involvement in an illegal betting scheme tied to martial arts competitions. If that leaks publicly and gets tied to her name, it could destroy her reputation too. She wants to end this quickly and quietly. Samuel signed the agreement that same afternoon. He didn't feel victory, didn't feel joy. He only felt an emptiness where a marriage used to be, and a renewed determination to rebuild his life on solid ground, the same ground he'd always tried to teach on the mat. The months that followed were about rebuilding. Samuel threw himself into work, expanded dojo classes, started offering free lessons to underprivileged kids on Saturdays. News of Alexander's expulsion and the divorce spread through the judo community, and while there was inevitable gossip, most people supported Samuel. Other senseis reached out, offering solidarity, some even sharing their own stories of betrayal and fresh starts. Samuel sold the house. He couldn't walk into the living room without seeing that scene. He bought a smaller, more modern apartment closer to the dojo. He left behind memories, ghosts, that cursed couch, which he sent straight to the dump without a second thought. He built a new space that was entirely his, with no traces of Olivia or a past he preferred to forget. 8 months after the discovery, Samuel was at a major national competition. His school had grown, new students enrolled every week, drawn by its renewed reputation for integrity and excellence. That day, his team had just won the team championship, an unprecedented achievement for the school. Athletes celebrated on the mat, jumping, shouting, hoisting Samuel onto their shoulders as the crowd cheered. It was in the middle of the celebration that Samuel saw her. Olivia stood on the other side of the gym, near the bleachers, almost hidden behind a pillar. She looked different, thinner, hair shorter, dressed simply without the glow she'd always cultivated. She was alone, just watching. Their eyes met for a brief moment across the noisy crowd. Samuel saw something on her face that might have been regret, or maybe just the realization of what she'd lost. There she was, alone, while he was surrounded by people who respected, admired, and loved him. Her life had crumbled while his had rebuilt stronger. For a second, Samuel considered waving, acknowledging her presence with basic courtesy. But then one of his students, a 17-year-old who'd just won gold in his division, pulled Samuel over for the official photos. The team gathered, all smiling, medals gleaming around their necks. The competition's official photographer snapped photo after photo. Samuel put his arm around his athletes, feeling genuine pride in having helped shape these people, not just as fighters, but as individuals of character. When he looked back to where Olivia had been, she was gone. Maybe she'd left, unable to watch any longer. Maybe she'd finally understood that some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. Samuel turned his full attention back to the celebration. There was no room in his new life for ghosts from the past. That night, back at the hotel, Samuel stood on his room's balcony looking at the city lights. He thought about Olivia, Alexander, everything that had happened. The betrayal still hurt when he allowed his mind to return to that moment, walking into the living room and seeing his wife in his most problematic student's arms. But the pain was different now, more distant, like an old scar that only aches when the weather changes. Samuel realized something fundamental during those months of rebuilding: judo had always been more than a sport to him. It was a philosophy, a code for living. And the principles he preached on the mat, self-respect, discipline, getting back up after a fall, weren't just nice words. They were survival tools. Olivia and Alexander had tested his values in the cruelest way possible, and he'd passed. Not with violent revenge or consuming hatred, but with dignity, with the strength of character he'd built over the years. At the dojo the following Monday, Samuel was teaching the kids' class when a new parent came to enroll his 6-year-old son. During their conversation, the man casually mentioned he was going through a divorce, his voice heavy with shame and pain. Samuel recognized that tone. He'd spoken that way himself months earlier. He put a hand on the man's shoulder. Sometimes life knocks us down. But what matters is how we get back up. The man looked at him, surprised, and Samuel saw recognition there, a silent connection between people who'd survived similar storms. A full year after that fateful Friday, Samuel was on the same route, following the dojo van in his car heading to a competition. But everything was different now. The team was bigger, the athletes better prepared, and he himself was a stronger version of who he'd been. His marriage to Olivia felt like a past life, almost surreal in its distance. He no longer hated her, no longer felt burning rage. He only felt indifference, and maybe a bit of gratitude for the brutal lesson she'd unknowingly taught him. The lesson was simple but profound: character is revealed in hard choices, not easy ones. Olivia revealed hers on that couch. Alexander revealed his when he jumped out the window and vanished into the night. And Samuel revealed his by choosing dignity over revenge, by choosing to rebuild instead of letting anger destroy him. Judo always taught that true victory isn't over your opponent, but over your own weaknesses. Samuel finally understood that lesson in full. The road stretched ahead, clear and open. Samuel drove with the windows down, wind tousling his hair, a feeling of freedom he hadn't felt in years. The radio played something upbeat, and he turned it louder, allowing himself to smile. His life had been turned upside down, ripped in half, exposed in its raw vulnerability. But he'd done what he'd always taught his students to do: he'd gotten up, brushed off the dust, and kept fighting. And in that process, he'd discovered something surprising: sometimes, losing everything is the first step to getting yourself back. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.